From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. It is absolutely belting it down in Salford this afternoon. It's a dirty old town today. Miserable. So it is. It's coming up for 3 minutes past 5. Wednesday, 19th of February. How you doing? Hope you've had a good day, regardless of the weather. I am Richie Allen, the BBG, not the BBC. Two brilliant guests lined up for you today. Important things to be talked about. Let's do it then on your Richie Allen radio show. Always good to be with you. And that is the truth. Let's do it then.
Fabulous.
It's all good.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Well, Michael Rivero was one of the very early broadcasters in the independent media. He's been around a long time. WhatReallyHappened.com is a fantastic resource of information. He's a great guy, Mike, and I welcome him back to the programme today for the first time in quite a while. He's been unwell, Michael, and he's had a hospital stay, so I'm delighted that he's out and he's well. Lots to talk about with him. He joins me this hour. And I mentioned on the live stream nonsense this morning on YouTube that I've invited John Kitson of 5G Awareness back to the programme, because I am being asked a lot, quite a lot actually, by people to tell them where the 5G transmitters are, where they're placed, where they've been switched on. And this is because a lot of new phones have, well, reached the marketplace in the last couple of weeks. Samsung more, I suppose notably. iPhones are on the way, and Huawei have got a new phone out, Sony have got a new phone out, and they're all 5G ready. So we'll do that with John Kitson in the second hour. Before that, of course, we'll round up the biggest news stories of the day on your Richie Allen Show, which is live on multiple platforms around the world, and of course Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, in the great city of Manchester. Lovely. Yes, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good morning, wherever you happen to be in the world. If you'd like to tweet something to me, tweet the bejesus out of me. Look forward to hearing from you. And I'll read them out as we go along, as I say. Now, the biggest story today, I suppose, well, the biggest story, the one doing, I suppose, getting the most coverage is the government's announcement here in the UK on how it's going to tackle immigration to the country. New immigration plans. Yes, coronavirus, or what? What are they calling it now? They have a new name for it, don't they? I've got it written down somewhere. Anyway, that's big as well. The cruise ship, people disembarking from that Princess cruise ship in Japan. British people are still there. That's doing the business, that story. But immigration, because the government has announced that low-skilled workers wouldn't get visas after Brexit. The government is asking employers to move away from relying on cheap labour from Europe and rather invest in retaining their staff and developing automation technology. Talked about this morning. What the right hand giveth, the left hand taketh away. Yeah, so the Home Office then and Priti Patel said European Union and non-European Union citizens coming to the UK would be treated equally. The Labour Party has said this is a hostile environment. But let's have a listen to Priti Patel. She's the Home Secretary, speaking to BBC Breakfast, saying the government wants to encourage people with the right talent, but also to reduce the levels of people coming to the country with low skills. We want to get talented people, she said. We don't want so many people coming here that have low skills. Priti Patel.
From January the 1st next year, we will have this new points-based system, and it's going to be phased over a number of years. But with regards to how people can come to the UK to work, they do need to meet these skills criteria. So we've already set out in the policy statement and the document the level of skills qualifications that people need to come to the UK, and obviously points will be applying to that. But if, for example, they don't necessarily have or don't meet, for example, the salary threshold, but have the right level of skills in a particular sector where there is demand for their skills, then of course they will be coming to the UK and they will have tradable points that they will gain to come to the UK and work in the UK. But they're going to need to be sponsored by businesses, by employers, and we're already working with and discussing with businesses in terms of how that system will work and what this also means for business sponsorship, the way visas are granted. We're going to streamline the visa system to make it much more swifter, much more efficient. But importantly now, this basically redefines our immigration policy. So the brightest and the best, people with skills need to come to the UK, and we will no longer have the routes for cheap, low-skilled labour that obviously has dominated immigration and our labour market for far too long in this country.
Now, you heard me say that the Labour Party has accused the government of creating a hostile environment. Here is the Shadow Health Secretary, Labour's Jonathan Ashworth, and he talks about how this is going to be problematic, how the government's plans will be problematic in the care industry, because we need people coming from overseas to look after our elderly and infirm when they leave hospital. Jonathan Ashworth.
I mean, she's clearly clueless, isn't she? I mean, not only are these proposals hugely damaging for our economy, making a complete mockery of Tory claims to level up our economy, they're potentially devastating for our health and care sector. Our NHS and our social care sector has always relied on international recruitment, and although there may well be exemptions for certain categories of NHS staff, it seems there'll be no exemptions whatsoever for social care staff. Now, at the moment, there's around 250,000 staff working in our social care sector we've recruited internationally, and we also have vacancies for 122,000 staff in social care. Now, if we cannot find those staff in social care, and these new immigration rules exacerbate the vacancies in social care, that will mean many elderly people, perhaps your grandma, or maybe not yours in particular, but the viewers' grandmas or aunties, waiting even longer in hospital because they cannot be discharged from the hospital. It means many elderly and vulnerable people out in the community not getting the support that they deserve. So these policies will detrimentally impact on the lives of some of the most vulnerable people in our society.
Yeah, he's talking through his arse. The government and the previous government and the governments before it and the governments before it again, they don't treat carers properly. Caring for somebody in their home is a hugely responsible job. It's important, right? Isn't it? It's a great humanitarian, almost vocational thing to do. We shouldn't say vocational because people have to be paid properly. But carers are treated like shit and they're not paid properly. Why not? I've said this 1,000 times. Why not train up thousands of carers properly? Vet them properly. English and Scottish and Welsh and Irish boys and girls who've not got qualifications from university or from college, who don't have a trade like hairdressing or auto detailing or whatever. Train them. Find good young men and women and pay them properly, because it is responsible. And then local authorities won't be able to get away with hiring carers to look after often very frail old people, hiring them from other parts of the world. And I don't have a xenophobic bone in my body. You know this. But what a kick in the arse it is to a confused, worried, sick, elderly man or woman to be cared for by somebody speaking in a different accent, whose English is not great, who's got nothing in common with the person they're caring for. I can't get my head round this. Shortage of carers. Train people up properly. Invest in coaches, in training centres. Pay the young men and women properly. It's a beautiful thing. I'll tell you something else, and I mean this. I would consider going into that business. I shouldn't say business. Into that career. I would, if the terms were right. Because I could see myself doing something like that. You know, driving around, being independent. and looking after a group of people that you're tasked with looking after, doing their shopping, spending some time with them, making sure they've got their medicines or they get out for a bit in the afternoon, that they're looked after, cleaning their house. I could do it. But pay people properly to do it. It's a hugely responsible job. And it drives me mad when they talk about the necessity to recruit from overseas to do that. And don't throw this back at me xenophobia. Listen, if I had a 90-year-old granddad or an 85-year-old grandmother who wasn't well, I don't care what you say. I don't want somebody from Asia or from Africa who's been in the country a couple of years going around. And it's not because I'm xenophobic. It's because it's not ideal, is it? Do you understand where I'm coming from? I'll be called xenophobic anyway. I'm sure there are Asian men, women, African men and women doing a marvellous job, compassionate, decent, intelligent. But it's not ideal, is what I'm saying. Keep going back to this nonsense about, you know, if the government gets its way, we'll have a shortage of care workers. Pay them properly, train them properly. It's all money that comes back to you. Spend money on training them, pay them well, and they'll spend money in their local communities. Jesus Christ, that's Commerce 101, that, isn't it? What about Nigel Farage, the leader of the Brexit Party? Still for now anyway. What does he say about the government's immigration plans?
Before we had an open door to 8 and then 10 former communist countries, the elderly got looked after, hotels ran, and strawberries didn't rot in the fields. And just because we've had this flood of cheap labour since 2004, I think what needs to happen here is some of the big employers need to recognise that their days of employing cheap labour, which may be good for them but not so good for the communities into which people come, that is finished. And that is something the government's done today.
Right, Farage. Jean Ann has bailed me out here. She's just sent me a quick message. On my comments on getting people born and bred in this country, and that might be people born and bred who might be black. That might be people born and bred whose ancestry might be Chinese. Yes, but they've been born and bred in this country. Jean Ann put it absolutely right. She says, in other words, she says, familiarity breeds content. Especially when you're old. You like the familiar. Beautifully put by Jean Ann. Saying it as I should have said it. That's what I mean by that. Nothing against people from any part of the world. But if you're going to get people to look after the elderly, who might be in a state of confusion, who might have Alzheimer's, dementia, might have memory issues, you know, at least have carers that were born and bred in the UK. And I don't give a shit what colour they are. Born and bred here. Does my brains in this? I've talked about this too long over the years, you know. Anyway. Hey, listen, it's going to be moot. It's going to be moot. Because the lunatics that are running this asylum, they want robots to do it, don't they? In the very near future, they've even got prototypes of droids that sit there talking bollocks to confuse senior citizens. That's how crazy things are going to get. 16 and a half minutes past the hour. And on the whole thing about immigration, working class people, and how low-skilled migrants have ultimately been a problem for working class areas, because when the low-skilled migrant comes in from, it doesn't matter, from whatever part of the world, and is then competing for a semi-skilled or a low-skilled job, it puts pressure on the man or woman who's lived here, grown up here. It's more pressure. It becomes more difficult for them to get a job. We've talked about this too many times, so I won't labour the point. But I want to play a bit of audio. Here is LBC's James O'Brien, who I believe presents a programme for LBC in the mid-morning. And when I say I believe, I've heard him before. I'm not sure. They move these people around. I think he's on in the mid-morning. O'Brien is a classic gatekeeper. And here he is humiliating a caller called John from Bethnal Green. John seems to know what he's trying to say, but he's not the most articulate of fellas. Again, I'm not passing judgment on his intelligence. John could be extremely intelligent. I've met some amazingly intelligent people that weren't the most articulate, he says, ironically choking on the word even articulate there. So John goes on LBC and he wants to talk about how Bethnal Green is unrecognisable. Now, I listened to the entire interview. At no time does John in the interview have a go at James O'Brien and say to James O'Brien that you are racist against white people. He doesn't say that at all. But O'Brien wants to accuse John, kind of gaslighting him, of saying that very thing even though John didn't say it. Listen to this. This is classic gatekeeping by the media on an issue that affects a lot of people, where their street, where their town is virtually unrecognisable now to how it was maybe 10 years ago. Listen carefully.
John, just say the bit about me being racist against the indigenous people of this country, will you? Because I haven't heard that for years.
He never said that. Listen to O'Brien again. Just say that bit about me being racist against the indigenous people of Britain or whatever, because I haven't heard that for years. John wasn't saying that at all. This is shocking by LBC's James O'Brien.
John, just say the bit about me being racist against the indigenous people of this country, will you? Because I haven't heard that for years.
No, you're clever talking on the end of the phone, the way you talk.
Yeah.
You won't listen to nobody.
No, I'm listening to you. Tell me that I'm racist.
You just said to a fella, your world at 48 and his world at 38, a million miles apart.
Yes.
Well, let me tell you, my world and your world don't ever come together. And you know why he won by 80?
But here you are talking to me.
Because he won by 80. No, you can't be cocky with me.
I'm not. I'm just pointing out that we've come together. You're now talking to me.
You work... When you keep on saying about all the people that run the country,
yes,
you work for one of the biggest racketeers in the world. Let alone, oh yeah.
He does, by the way. Look up the owner of Global Media, and he's right in terms of how he's being characterised by the caller John there. But anyway,
yeah, you make me laugh. You don't know the facts of life, my friend.
Well, go on, educate me, John. Educate me.
What?
I said educate me.
Educate you? You couldn't get educated because you've got a vision one way.
Yeah, go on. Tell me what I need to know.
Any other way but the way you want to see it.
Tell me what I need to know.
Unfortunately, I live in Bethnal Green. I go down Bethnal Green Road.
Yes.
Old Bethnal Green. Where the academy was, where you keep talking about this school. It used to be Dainford School. But all my mates used to go, I look at it now, I don't even recognise the place. And all the people I used to know have all run away.
Are we talking about decorations or architecture?
See, this is dreadful, this sarcasm, this crap by O'Brien. O'Brien knows exactly what the chap is trying to say. The chap is trying to say that the demographics of the area have changed completely in a few years. My type of people used to live around here, is what he's trying to say. White people, black British, white British, my type of people used to live around here. Now, it's a lot of Somalians, it's a lot of Bangladeshi people, it's a lot of African people. Lovely, good luck to them, but they don't look like me, they don't sound like me. And they don't speak my language. That's what he's trying to say. But O'Brien starts to take the piss out of him, talking about architecture and stuff. This is gatekeeping by the mainstream media, gaslighting people, humiliating and mocking people who've got an opinion that's important, that needs to be heard.
Architect.
What do you mean you don't recognise your own street?
I don't recognise walking up and down. I do not know anyone here.
Okay.
I don't know a soul here anymore.
Have you tried being friendlier? Have you tried being friendlier?
Whitechapel. What?
Have you tried being friendlier?
Have you tried being friendlier? Jerry Ryan, who passed away a few years ago, was one of the greatest radio presenters that ever lived in any country. And Jerry Ryan might not have agreed with the caller John from Bethnal Green, but he would have listened to him. And he would have kept him on the line, and he would have got other callers phoning in. Jerry would have said to him, what do you mean, John? What do you mean? Are you talking about the types of people living around? Tell me a little bit more. And he would have given him a bit of space to kind of flesh out what it is that he's trying to say, which is, I feel like a bit of a stranger in my own community. And there's nothing racist about that, or xenophobic about it, or underhand or sinister about it. Told you about myself and Ike and Caroline living in North Wembley, meeting one white guy every 2 or 3 days if we were lucky, and speaking to an old white gentleman who said, Jesus, it's terrible living around here. We said, why? Why is it terrible living around here? And he said, most people around here, he said, they don't speak English anymore. And we started paying attention, David Icke and myself, and he was right. But O'Brien's a gatekeeper. LBC is a gatekeeper. BBC News, BBC Radio 5 Live, gatekeeper. Got to mock these people and put them down instead of listening to what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
Be friendly.
Because you sound quite rude and angry to me.
Listen, rude and angry.
There's an echo on the line. Is there an echo at your end?
What?
Is there an echo at your end?
No.
What?
No.
Who?
What? Who says O'Brien? There was a time when you would have been warned by the managing editor of the radio station. There was a time when you would have been warned about that. When you would have been pulled in and they would have said, don't do that to people. Don't do that to people. You're a fucker. You know, you spend, 10 hours a week on the radio. It's your domain. You're used to it. You've got a huge advantage. Don't do that to people. Let the guy say what he wants to say. Let the audience be the judge. The guy's trying to say that life is a bit difficult for him. Maybe he's a bit down on his luck. Maybe he's a bit fed up. You could have a conversation with John and you could say to him, well, if there are people from Bangladesh in your community, if they're from Somalia, it's not their fault, John. They're good people. But I hear you, mate. You know, it's not ideal for you, maybe. Bit of a culture shock, maybe. And you could let him speak. Not judge him. Not mock him. But that's the media today. And it's gone on, not just on LBC today, but on a lot of radio stations. After this was announced by Priti Patel, that this immigration policy by the government is going to be enacted. It's disgusting. Disgusting. And I'm no virtue signaller, but I've never done that to a caller. I've had callers on radio shows in Ireland and Spain saying the most stupid stuff. And John wasn't saying anything remotely stupid. But I would never humiliate anybody. Let them speak. Have a chat with them. Let the audience make their minds up. We used to believe at one time or another that the audience was clever enough to determine for themselves what's the truth and what isn't the truth. Let the audience decide if John's a racist. Or maybe if you do that, and of course this is the big fear the media has, if you do that, maybe a lot of people listening will go, well, I feel for John. You know, I feel for him. I remember going down a street in Leicester with David Icke. David talked about how it had completely changed in terms of the ethnic makeup of the area compared to the way it was when he was growing up in Leicester. And he said it's a massive shock that for elderly people in the area, for other people. And when nobody listens to them, when nobody hears what they have to say, what do? What do guys like John do when they are humiliated by fucking dickheads like James O'Brien? Do you know what they do? They turn to the far right. Why? Because it's only on the far right that anybody will actually listen to them. Maybe that's the whole point of it, maybe. 26 minutes past the hour. There was plenty more to talk about, but I dwelled on that. This is Salford's Bez calling. Happy Monday, step on the Richie Allen Radio Show. Wednesday, Bez, Rowetta, and Sean Ryder on the Richie Allen Radio Show. 29 minutes to the top of the hour. Salford, Greater Manchester, chucking it down, belting it down. It's grim, it's miserable. But it's still kind of bright outside. That's no bad thing. Now, a lot of you tweeting about James O'Brien there. And your annoyance as to the carry-on of O'Brien. It's typical, though. It isn't just O'Brien, by the way. As I said, I do listen to quite a lot of mid-morning radio. Not just national radio, but local radio as well. There aren't too many mid-morning talk shows left in the country. But where they are in operation, callers who were saying that, well, I agree with the government's immigration plan to stop low-skilled migrants coming in. Well, they were being treated pretty badly. on the radio waves today, but that's how it goes. Right. Let's see, is Michael there? I think he might very well be. You know all about whatreallyhappened.com and the What Really Happened radio show. It's been a huge part of my life for many, many years. And the website, What Really Happened, has been more than a useful guide and resource for this presenter during the course of my career in independent radio. A brilliant guy, great broadcaster, and as I mentioned at the top of the programme, he's been doing independent radio and I suppose, I won't say conspiracy research, but looking behind the spin of governments to try and get to the heart of the truth. He's been doing that for as long as anybody else, and he does it incredibly well. Glad he's back on his feet because he's not been well of late. Let's just welcome back to the programme our great friend Michael Rivero. Michael, welcome back to the programme. How are you?
I'm glad to be here. What can I tell you? Thank you for having me on the air again.
Michael, any time. When you weren't well, you're that well known and that well respected. I had dozens, more than dozens of people tweeting me and asking me, Richie, you've had Michael on your show for years. What's going on? I don't want to be personal, Mike, so you tell me to mind my own business. But I know you were in hospital. Obviously, you don't have to talk about that and let people know what it is because it's nobody's business. But are you okay, and are you going to be okay?
I'm going to be okay. I'm under treatment now for a neurological autoimmune disorder, which is just something that happens to older people. And it attacks the muscles and the nerves. And I wasn't in the hospital all that long, but I was in an inpatient physical therapy clinic. I literally had to learn how to walk all over again. So it was pretty serious there for a while. But I'm on the mend right now, and, I'm going to be on medication for quite a long time, but I'm definitely doing better. I'm getting my energy back. I'm back doing my radio show and the website. So I want to extend my gratitude to everybody who sent in get well wishes, and thank you all very much for the kind support you showed.
You had well wishers in the thousands, in the tens of thousands. It's a remarkable thing, and it's a testimony to your longevity in the business of independent radio. It really is. I don't want to dwell on it, and I won't. We'll move on now to talk about some of the bigger stories. But having to learn to walk all over again, that must have been a bit scary, I imagine.
Yeah, it really was, and I was very worried that I wasn't going to recover, and of course, it drove my wife crazy, worrying about me as well. But all's well that ends well, and like I said, I'm back on my feet, and we're still finishing up getting into our new home here in Indiana.
I'm delighted, Mike, and give our best to Claire later on as well. We know Claire, of course. We know of Claire because we know you. We've known you for so long. When I said you were coming on today, it's lovely when I bring somebody like you on because people tweet, Richie, ask him this, ask him that. What are your thoughts, Michael, about coronavirus and the relentless coverage of it in the media? The claims being made about it, the cruise liner being put into quarantine. This is let's give our listeners the absolute. There's a new name for it now, Mike. It's just dropped off my screen there. It's not
COVID-19.
That's the one. Thanks for bailing me out. What do you think of it? Some people think that this is being exaggerated. Others are saying that it's got an almost like a drill quality to it in terms of their conditioning people. Over to you. What do you think? How have you read this?
Yeah, there's a lot of bad information floating around in both directions. There's a lot of people saying it's no big deal. There's a lot of people out there saying it could be the slate wiper, and the truth is going to be someplace in between. And I think the not really knowing what's going on is probably playing with people's heads quite a bit. And I think part of the problem, of course, is we know that the SARS virus was exaggerated to boost vaccine sales. MERS was exaggerated to boost vaccine sales. Back in 2009, what I call the when pigs fly flu was being exaggerated to stimulate vaccine sales. And so when this first surfaced, it just sounded like more of the same. Oh, the vaccine companies want to make a bunch of money, so they're going to take this COVID-19 and they're going to fan it up in the media. And of course, as far as newspapers and corporate media are concerned, they want to sensationalize it to boost their audience and boost their ad revenues. But the problem here is that enough people are taking this seriously that regardless of how serious or harmless this virus is, the damage to the economies and the supply chain is very, very real indeed.
I'm glad you brought it up now, because we heard the chief executive of Jaguar Land Rover, massive, of course, companies here in the UK, say that they're having difficulties getting parts from China. We've heard other business leaders say that supply chain has been held up. That's very serious, Michael, isn't it? It's far more serious than maybe a lot of us. Well, you've obviously been paying attention to it, and could have a dramatic impact on the economy, but also could have a big impact on people's jobs.
Absolutely. And a lot of factories in China shut down. They're starting to reopen now, but it's going to be a long time before we've fully recovered from the economic disruption of COVID-19. And like I said, it's really going to be tragic if it turns out that this virus, wasn't that much of a threat to anybody outside of China, because as far as anybody can tell, only ethnic East Asians are succumbing to it. And so whatever this virus is, it's definitely ethnically sensitive.
Michael, do we have to be a bit suspicious of the air quality over places like Wuhan? It's apparently terrible. And then John Rappaport, whom is a journalist like yourself I've got a lot of admiration for, and he's never put me wrong over the years, John. Like yourself, he's very circumspect, and he takes a good look at something before he offers an opinion. And John talked about incinerators there that were apparently spewing very toxic stuff into the air. I wonder how much of this might be attributable to, well, that very thing, environmental factors.
Well, the environmental factors are definitely going to work toward compromising the immune systems of the people who are exposed to it. But in the end, a lot of people are wondering if the BSL-4 biological laboratory that was located quite close to that fish market that's being blamed as ground zero for the epidemic, if somebody might have dropped a test tube, because it's known they were working with bats that were infected with COVID-19, and there was at least one incident where a researcher was attacked by the bats and blood was being spilled. Now, he went into a voluntary 14-day quarantine and did not come down with symptoms, but now they're saying that the actual incubation period could be far longer than 14 days, could be 24 days, could even be longer than that. So it's possible that for 14 days he was not symptomatic, didn't test positive, then went or not, or it could have been, it could have walked out of the lab on somebody's shoes.
Wow. And what about, just finally on the COVID-19, what about some people's, I mean, we hear speculation from a lot of different people, but some of the people who speculate are people that you and I, we might respect them. And some of them say, well, watch the reaction to this crisis. And the reaction is the way they've shut down places, the way they've placed people in quarantine, hazmats everywhere, and even the military being brought in to assist. And that's in the UK as well, taking people off planes and bringing them to quarantine areas. Some people I respect, they've said, well, this might be a drill. Maybe we're being played or conditioned to accept these types of things in the future. How you doing, Mr. Rivero? I'm sorry, but you can't leave the house today. Is there any, does that sound a bit far-fetched to you, Michael, or do you understand why some people are beginning to think like that?
Well, I can understand, again, as I said before, the fact that we don't trust any of the sources who are talking about COVID-19. People are allowing their imaginations to run wild. Now, what we're seeing here in terms of all the quarantines and the Diamond Princess and the bringing people into quarantine centers on the military bases, it may be a classic case of erring on the side of caution. But I think most of us would agree that we would rather be a little too cautious and too careful than not careful enough if, in fact, COVID-19 turns out to start infecting people other than ethnic Chinese.
It's nice to have a different point of view on the programme, Michael. I've taken a different approach to you, but I like having a different point of view. I suppose my final word, and you can have the final word on this if you want before we talk about President Trump and before we talk about other things. My final word would be, and I totally respect what you've said, and I have no insight. I certainly don't have any more insight than you. Is you mentioned at the top of the conversation that they've told us a lot of porkies over the years about other viruses. You mentioned swine flu, you mentioned SARS. There are others that don't come to mind straight away. That would lead me to think that it's just more nonsense, and that in a couple of weeks' time, it'll be out of the news cycle. They will have a vaccine, and people will rush to get that vaccine, and Big Pharma wins again.
Yeah, I have a feeling that may be how this is ultimately going to turn out. But it's obvious that a lot of people are very scared right now. And as I said, the real damage and destruction we're seeing is to the economy of China and secondarily to the economies of places like Great Britain with the Jaguar Land Rover factory running out of parts. And it's the downside of globalism in that because we're also dependent on so many other countries, if there's a problem there, it becomes a problem here. And I am hoping that Jaguar Land Rover will start looking to British companies to supply the parts for their cars rather than China.
Michael, do you know we could do a whole show on that, couldn't we? Absolutely
yes,
right.
Yes, we could.
We could do a whole show on that. Michael Rivero is back, thank God. WhatReallyHappened.com. If you haven't been there before, I know you have. Great website, great resource, real news, and the What Really Happened radio show is unmissable. Check it out. Donald Trump supporters, well, what a rabble. Now, I don't support any politician anywhere in the world. I don't make Trump any worse than any other politician. But for a man who said, Michael, when he ran for president back in 2016, I'm going to drain the swamp, God damn it. He's letting people out of prison, Michael, that are, well, they are the swamp. What's going on?
Well, it does appear that the swamp is winning. And, Trump has disappointed a lot of his supporters, including yours truly. He promised he was going to, no more wars, and yet here we are still. Yeah. The war agenda is well and truly underway. He was going to go after the deep state operatives like Hillary Clinton. That didn't happen. He was going to reform our election system so that cheating became much more difficult. That hasn't happened, and already we're seeing indications of massive fraud. If, to be more benign and positive, major problems with our election system like we saw in Iowa, and they're very concerned the same thing is going to repeat during the Nevada caucuses as well. So the more complicated they make the election system, the easier it is for the unscrupulous and nefarious to game it. And I think we just need to go back to paper ballots and hand counting everything. There's no law that says we have to learn who won the election that very same night.
Yeah.
And I would rather trade speed for accuracy in what is basically the most important duty every American citizen has.
Great point, Michael. The Irish election has just been and gone, as you know, and it threw up a very, well, not so surprising because the polls did indicate that Sinn Féin, the Republican Party, were going to do well. But on that point of counting the paper ballots, it was 48 hours really before people knew the exact result, and nobody seemed to mind. So I'll give you that, no doubt about that. Well, we won't waste too much time talking about Trump being a huge disappointment, but let's talk a little bit about the election in November. Does Bernie Sanders or the media magnate Michael Bloomberg, does either of those two men have any realistic chance of beating Donald Trump?
I don't think so at this point. I think people are very disgusted with the Democratic Party as a whole because of all of this impeachment nonsense. And the Democratic core doesn't want a socialist president. They don't think a socialist president can defeat Trump. The fact of the matter is they don't have anybody poised who can defeat Donald Trump, not because Trump is such a huge success, but because the Democrats aren't fielding any credible candidates. People are resenting Michael Bloomberg just stepping in and throwing around a bunch of money to try and buy the presidency. Bernie Sanders is a socialist. Buttigieg is gay. They're all carrying a lot of baggage from times past. And the concern is there's going to be a brokered convention because there will not be a first ballot victory. And at that point, there is a distinct possibility that Hillary Clinton could step on in to, quote, save the Democratic Party. As you know, Bloomberg, there was a rumor that came out from Drudge Report that Bloomberg was considering Hillary as his vice presidential running mate. The Bloomberg campaign will neither confirm nor deny. Hillary came out with a statement today saying, well, she's just going to stand on the sidelines and wave, which if you look at that very closely, it's neither a confirmation nor a denial that she wants to run as a vice president. But I'll tell you, if Bloomberg taps Hillary Clinton as his vice president, he'd better hire a food taster, wear his Kevlar, and stay out of small airplanes.
One of the most whoring criminal types that has ever walked planet Earth. The truly despicable, vile, evil Hillary Clinton. You think, Mike, if you were forced to make a bet, to have a wager, you think she's still going to play a part then in the election?
Yeah, I think she's looking for a way to reinsert herself back into the process, and she may decide that being Bloomberg's VP is more likely to succeed than her coming into a brokered convention and trying to hijack it.
Imagine that. So you wouldn't, nothing about Sanders appeals to you. Just before you answer that, you mentioned Buttigieg. I've probably pronounced the guy's name wrong. Who's gay. Even in this era of wokeness, Michael, you don't think that a gay candidate could ever even win the nomination in the US?
I think that there are still enough people in the United States who would be very uncomfortable with the idea of a gay president, where I don't think he's going to get the traction. And he's not doing all that well in the polls anyway. And it's pronounced Buttigieg.
Buttigieg. I remember that, Buttigieg. Yeah, I've seen him on sound bites on CNN and on Fox News talking when I've been researching the programme. But I don't know a lot about him. And I only found out he was gay a couple of days ago. I was reading an article. So, yeah, I mean, the Irish Taoiseach, well, he won't be for very long. Leo Varadkar is gay. There is another one in Europe, I think. They're a bit more woke in Ireland. I couldn't care less, as I know you don't care less, Michael. But, yeah, interesting. Let's move away from that for a minute. Michael Rivero is our guest, folks. Do check out whatreallyhappened.com. The What Really Happened radio show is unmissable, and my word, you can take it to the bank. Terrific. It's been a great help to me over the years. In fact, when I began to leave the mainstream media and do independent radio, Michael was a must-listen program for me, brilliantly produced and presented by a top presenter. Michael, what about the Boy Scouts of America? I mean,
well,
what in the name of God? They're filing for bankruptcy, and it's been described as the largest paedophile ring on earth. What's going on there?
Well, it is a problem, and it's been a problem. And unfortunately, the leadership of the Boy Scout organization made the same mistake the Catholic Church did. Instead of dealing with it and tried to get the pedophiles out, they just covered it up in order to keep the new recruits coming in. And of course, Dennis Hastert, when he was Speaker of the House, pushed through a law saying that the Boy Scouts had to accept gays as scoutmasters. And of course, that opened the floodgates for all of this to happen. So now the Boy Scouts are looking at an estimated $1 billion in settlement money, and they're going to pay it, but they're going through the bankruptcy protection so that other people can't get at that money that's being set aside to pay off the victims of the abuse. But yes, it has been a problem for a lot of years. Now, I didn't see any of it when I was a Boy Scout, but that was a long, long time ago.
Let me pull you up on something, my great friend. Let me pull you up on something. You said there that the organisation opened the floodgates to allow gay men to come in as leaders. Mike, I think you're being a bit unfair there. I've looked at this for years. There's no evidence that gay men are more likely to be child abusers than straight men. There isn't. And I think you might be being a smidgen unfair on gay men. And a gay man might be listening to this and he might say, Michael, that's lousy. That's not the reason why there were so many gays in the Boy Scouts. The reason is because they vetted nobody. Now, Michael, I had a very brief in the Cubs, which is before the Scouts, in Ireland years ago. Michael, I used to coach kids soccer many years ago. And you know what, Michael? Nobody was ever vetted. Nobody. Nobody's background was looked into. I looked after 3 or 4 different teams over a 5-6 year period, and I could have been a paedophile. Nobody knew. So you might be being a bit unfair there saying that when they allowed gay men in, it became a problem. What do you think?
Well, when you look that it's gay men going after small boys, I mean, to me, that's not a heterosexual relationship. But I will concede that maybe I'm being a little bit engaging in stereotypes here because, again, it's an exclusively male organization. And, but a lot of pedophiles are gay. I don't know how many pedophiles are not gay, but at least they're bi.
Do you know what, Michael? It's an amazing thing. This whole, I mean, again, we could do a whole show on this whole area of volunteering. I mean, I wonder, now that we've seen, the emergence of so many horror stories about abuse over the years in sporting organisations, in clubs and associations like the Scouts and the Girl Guides, I wonder what's changed. And you know what, Michael? You've been around a bit longer than I have. I believe that ultimately nothing changes. And while they might say, well, it's 2020, we are a bit more careful now about who we let in, to work with children. I bet you they're not being more careful. I bet you if you wanted to teach T-ball or softball, or you wanted to get involved in pee-wee soccer or football for kids. I bet you it's bloody easy, Michael. And paedophiles have known for years. You know, these organisations exist, and if you want to get access to children, you sign up as a volunteer or as a coach. I wonder, has it become more difficult? I bet you it hasn't.
I don't really have any accurate information on that, but I think probably for any organization that's strapped for cash, you're absolutely right. They're not doing any vetting of the people coming on in, other than to check the sex offender registry.
That's all they do, Michael. That's a good point, because a friend of mine said to me recently, Richie, you used to coach soccer, and I said I do, or I did. I don't have any qualifications, so these days I wouldn't be allowed to take a team. Anyway, you've got to have basic training courses done in terms of you've got to know how to do the coaching properly. But he said, oh, you know, there are local teams, they're always looking for people. And I think you're right. I think they would just have a look to see if I'd got any convictions. Outside of that, they probably wouldn't look too deep, you know, kind of deep into my background. 7 minutes to the top of the hour. We've got Michael for another couple of minutes. WhatReallyHappened.com, the What Really Happened radio show. You following politics here, Mike, while you were convalescing? Brexit has happened, or at least it looks like it's happened. They've still got the negotiated trade deal here. Of course, we had the big argument about Huawei being used to roll out 5G here in the UK, and Donald Trump's administration was threatening the UK government not to deal with Huawei in China. The UK government is dealing with it anyway. Is that important, Michael? Do you look at that as important, you know, security concerns? Is the US government right to be concerned about Huawei being part of 5G here in the UK?
It's not a security concern. It's purely economic. The US is losing competitiveness with China, and it's going to get a lot worse because Huawei has now discounted all of their 5G chips and hardware by 30%, and the American manufacturers can't keep up with it. But the United States wants everybody to come to the United States for 5G hardware, and that's why they're trying to basically threaten anybody who's going to China and say, don't do business with them, you do business with us. You know, you got a nice country there. It would be terrible if something bad were to happen to it. It's real kind of mafia-like thinking. And it is purely economic and not security concerns.
Michael, we've heard a lot. The newspapers, everybody's talked about the security concerns. They've not talked about safety. When you've gone to prepare your own program, a little bit later in this show, I'll be talking to somebody about 5G. There are grave safety concerns about the technology that are not being addressed. I know in your country, moratoriums have been put in place in certain parts of the country, California being one, where they've said we shouldn't roll this out until we look at a public health impact survey. What do you think about 5G and the implications for our health?
Well, I think we ought to be taking a look at the cumulative effect of all the radio energy that's in our environment, whether it's 5G, 4G, 3G, police radios, TV broadcasts, radio broadcasts, CB radios. I'm giving my age away there. It's not called CB anymore. You can't point to anyone and say this is harmful and the others are not. That being said, I think the attack on 5G in the United States, again, is to preserve those companies that invested in 4G who have not yet had a chance to amortize all of that investment. So again, it's all driven by economics. Our country is desperately, desperately broken in debt. And so right now it seems like finding a way to rebuild our industry or to capture markets around the world dominates our foreign policy thinking. It's like how the U.S. is sanctioning all countries that are doing business with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to try and shut that down, because the U.S. wants to have control over the flow of oil. They want to remain the world's dominant international currency. All of these, unfortunately, are starting to fail. And I think the United States is headed for some very, very rough times.
Great stuff, Michael. One final question before we part company today. Marvellous to have you back, my friend. Really great to have you back on the programme. A television presenter called Caroline Flack sadly took her own life very recently here in the UK. Charismatic young woman, talented young lady, had some difficulties. Heaven help her. The media and the government, almost in collusion, is turning on internet trolls and trying to apportion some blame to people abusing the woman on Twitter. Right. What's come out of that is a proposal which isn't new, but it seems to be gathering pace. and that is the proposal that internet anonymity should end, and that nobody should be allowed to have a YouTube, a Facebook, a Twitter account unless they can be identified and their location can be known. In other words, I know you tweet as Michael Rivero, I tweet as Richie Allen, but a lot of people don't because maybe they feel that their opinions might get them into trouble with their employers or whatever. That's got serious repercussions for freedom of speech, Michael, if they come out and insist that every one of us must be known and must have a tag. We must be easily identified online. What do you think?
Well, I think that if you cannot stand being criticized for being in the public eye, that you shouldn't be in the public eye to begin with. I would want to ask if this young lady was on prescription antidepressants.
She was, Mike.
Ah, okay. Then that, I think, probably has more to do with her committing suicide than any Twitter abuse that's out there. But I mean, I get all kinds of critical and insulting and things said about me, and I'm sure you do as well. And you just say, water off a duck's back. You can't please everybody, and there's no point really in trying. But if somebody can't stand being criticized in the social media for being a public figure, then maybe they shouldn't be a public figure.
Good man, Michael. That's a great way to end it today. Do us a favour. First of all, continued success in your rehabilitation. You sound great. You didn't sound marvellous last time you were on, but we knew that. We knew you were a bit under the weather. You sound fantastic. It's great you're back on the radio, and you are going to recover. If you're in good shape as you are now, next month, come back on. Continued success with the brilliant radio show, and give Claire our regards. Your better half, Mike. Love you, Mike. Great that you're back on, and our listeners are delighted to hear you and thrilled that you're back on your feet, my friend.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm glad to be here, and I look forward to next month.
Can't wait, Michael. All the best to everybody in Indiana. Michael Rivero, WhatReallyHappened.com, the What Really Happened radio show. Check him out if you haven't done before. I'm sure you have. Marvellous to hear the dulcet tones of our friend Michael Rivero. It is exactly 90 seconds to the top of the hour. I'm going to take a tune now. I'm not going to take a tune. I'm not. Jesus. John Kitson will join the Richie Allen radio show in a few minutes' time. It's interesting to me, a number of you are tweeting about 5G in Wuhan. Now, don't get your knickers in a twist. Don't get your knickers in a twist, I said. Be Jesus, be Jeebus, and be Jeepers. I'm always fascinated by how quickly people who consume the independent media are to jump on an idea or jump on something. And I've seen certain kind of well-known, and in other cases very well-known, independent content creators saying that they believe that 5G is playing some part in coronavirus, namely that the symptoms being experienced by people might be because of 5G. But in some cases, and this is very typical of the independent media, in some cases, people are declaring this to be a fact. And this pisses me right off. Because what it does is, Jesus, should I even go there? It makes a mockery of the independent media. It's not sound journalism to declare that Wuhan's 5G transmitters are in some way responsible for the outbreak of bad health in the region. Well, you don't know. Of course I don't know that it hasn't been the case, but you don't know that it has been the case. That being said, I'm sure John Kitson has heard it, and we will put that question to John Kitson in a couple of minutes' time. Right? This is the BBG, not the BBC. My name is Richie Allen. Let's get the headlines from FSN.
From Feature Story News in London, I'm Ollie Barrett. Japanese authorities say all of the Diamond Princess passengers cleared of COVID-19 will be able to disembark the cruise ship within days. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says it's a matter of time before Ankara launches an operation to halt the Syrian assault on Idlib. The EU's releasing plans for the future of AI and says it mustn't negatively impact people's lives. And low-skilled workers will not receive visas under post-Brexit immigration plans revealed by the UK.
Yeah. The European Union says that AI mustn't impact people's lives negatively. Well, it's bloody well going to, isn't it? That's the whole point of it. It's 6:01. The Richie Allen Radio Show, live from Salford. I'll be back with you in about 30 seconds' time. Don't forget John Kitson on the other side of this.
Renowned healer Mark Byersky travels the world to find the most unique and powerful crystals for self-healing. Since the ancient times, crystals have been used as healing tools. They hold a natural healing vibration and are highly charged in positive energy. Mark teaches how to channel the universal energy and transfer it to the crystal to activate its healing power. Each crystal is used for its unique ability to target a different physical or emotional challenge. Mark Byersky is an author, healer, speaker, and founder of the Pure Energy Healing Academy. He shares powerful messages of inspiration and healing on his daily YouTube videos, reaching millions worldwide. Mark's crystals, healing oils, and incense sticks are most sought after by other healers. His collection is available online at www.markbyersky.com. His work is presented through Lemon House, a company that creates and curates consciously made gifts.
Yeah. I suppose we are coming out of the winter, but the winter won't go quietly. We're having horrendous weather across the country. I'm not going to complain about it. How could I? There are people in Yorkshire, there are people in Wales. God love them. Their houses are flooded up to their stairs. Halfway up their stairs, Jesus Christ. It's terrible. It really is. I can't imagine it. You know, now that we're in a property that might someday be ours, you know, we're mortgaged up to the tits, like everybody else that I know. But you have a different perspective on it. When you rent a property, you know, you don't want anything to happen to it. And when I rented properties, I took great care of them. My landlords would be the first to say, Jesus, Richie was great. The property came back in immaculate condition, always. And I would never be the type of person that would take a lackadaisical approach to a property I rented. But you always know there's a maintenance man. It's somebody else's problem. But when it's your property and you have to deal with insurance companies and a government that couldn't give a shit about you, it must be terrible. So those people have my genuine sympathies. Desperate rain in the west of Ireland, says Jean Ann. Definitely, I've been looking at the weather forecast today. Ireland, the UK, terrible in the west where Jean Ann is. And in parts of this country, it's horrendous as well. David Bowie then, or David Bowie. Bowie. It's a biscuit, it's a bar. It's a tomato, it's a tomato. John Kitson joins me after this. Right, let's cut off David Bowie in his prime. We don't like doing that, but I want to have more time with John. Now, I won't waste too much time telling you about John Kitson. You know who he is. Successfully had a moratorium granted in Totnes to stop the rollout of 5G in that area. Very successful campaigner, and is working tirelessly to raise awareness about the human health implications of 5G technology. He was an independent candidate in the last, the most recent general election, of course, a month and a half, 2 months ago, in that part of the world, in Devon. If you want to find out more about 5G in the UK and elsewhere, 5gawareness.com, that's 5gawareness.com, is a really, really good resource. And you'll find out more about John there and the ongoing campaigns. I'm glad that he's stepped out to have a chat with us today, because a number of you, well, quite a few of you, were in touch with this programme to ask about the arrival on the market or in the marketplace of brand new phones. Samsung famously this week, brand new phones, very powerful mobile phones, smartphones, very sexy devices that are 5G compatible. Not just Samsung. The iPhone is they've got a kind of a not a hybrid one. They've got these intermittent phones. They have their annual big releases, but they've got other releases of other phones and gadgets through the year. There is a new Apple iPhone coming out very, very soon. Huawei's got a new mobile out, and I mentioned earlier on Sony, all 5G. And people have been on to me saying, Richie, what's going on? Where are the transmitters? Where are they? Are they in town centres, Richie? Are they on our streets, Richie? What is happening? Because people can now can access 5G on their mobile phones. No better man to talk to about that than John Kitson. John, welcome back to the programme. How are you?
I'm very well, Richie. Thank you so much for having me back on the show.
You're welcome anytime. You know that. You've always got something to say, and that's important. Before we talk about that, before we get into the questions from listeners about the new phones, so 5G must be here. Where is it? Where are the transmitters? I've been fascinated today to kind of be trolling, not trolling, but trawling through social media. And a number of people in the US and elsewhere are wondering, now they can only speculate, they don't have any proof, but they are wondering if the coronavirus, COVID-19, this respiratory thing, which we've heard so much about in the last couple of weeks, this infection, this virus, they're wondering, because it emerged in the Wuhan province, and because of, obviously, the relationship between the Wuhan province and 5G and Huawei, people are wondering if there is a connection. Is it too early to speculate, John, or is that something that's worth investigating, do you think?
Oh, 100% worth investigating. I mean, it was back in 2018, it was reported that Wuhan would be the testbed city for the full 5G network operation in China. And this article went on to say that it would be fully operational by 2020. And of course, on the date of Halloween 2019, they actually turned it on. So this has actually been made fully functional before the first case of coronavirus came about. And Wuhan was the test bed. And if we look at the effects of 5G, we see a massive attack on the immune system. So people are much more vulnerable to all sorts of things like colds, flu. And if your immune system is sufficiently depleted, the common cold or flu can be a killer. And I think the problem is with China is you've got a population that doesn't question the government. You've got an unaccountable government, and they can get away with anything, quite frankly.
This is interesting, isn't it? Because if John Rappaport, the great medical journalist, is right, that, incinerators, terrible air quality might play a part in what's happening to people in China, it doesn't mean that the 5G situation there is not playing its part, because as you said there, we do know, thanks to people like you, but I've also had the pleasure of speaking to people like Chris Busby and others who've been on to non-ionizing radiation for years. They say, just like you, John, that it does have an effect. They are convinced it will have an effect on the immune system, so that they might not be mutually exclusive. The bad air quality plus 5G might mean catastrophe.
Yes, totally. And I mean, you look at the symptoms of flu, joint pain, bad heads, headaches. These are things that are coming up with the coronavirus, but also symptoms of microwave radiation. And of course, with this, if they do come out with a vaccine, and of course, there's a series that came out on Netflix where Bill Gates is the hero for this vaccine that deals with the pandemic. And of course, that's more metals going into the body. And the dangerous with that is, of course, compared with if you're consuming metals in your food, if you're getting it injected into your bloodstream, it's much more difficult to get rid of. And of course, the metals make you much more vulnerable. Having aluminium, for example, in your body makes you much more vulnerable to microwave radiation damage.
More susceptible to the effects of it. We've had a tweet from Jason about an article in El País in English, which something I know very well, having spent so many years in Spain. And El País in English is talking about dead birds being found in Tarragona this week. Lots of dead birds. And I know, I was away last week. I was unwell with a bit of an infection myself. I know that there have been instances in this country recently of large numbers of birds being found dead on certain roads. And Jason wonders, does the recent switching on of 5G have something to do with that? Could it be a way to explain why birds are dropping out of the sky?
Well, definitely. I mean, we're electromagnetic beings, and so are animals, and they rely on magnetic fields for guidance. And not only that, is the size of birds, you're talking about a much smaller body mass. So they're far more vulnerable to microwave radiation than we are. And then you go one size smaller, you look at the insects, and where have all our insects gone? We've had about a 70 to 80% decline in insects over the last 20 years. And birds are next on the list. And of course, when I went up to Gateshead to participate in Mark Steele's court case, where were all the birds? I just didn't see them.
Yeah.
And, that there have been found, clusters of birds near masts, bees. These smaller animals are the most at risk from 5G, definitely.
A couple of years ago, I drove to Cornwall with the missus, and I didn't take the motorway the entire way. I took some secondary roads, went through some rural areas on the way down, partly because I wanted to get off the motorway, but partly because there were some accidents being relayed to me by my sat-nav thing and what have you. And late that night, we'd had a bottle of wine. We rented this house in Cornwall. The missus and myself, totally thrilled to be away for a week. And I got a bit emotional late that night. She was asleep, Caroline was asleep. And I realised there was nothing on the windscreen of the car. And that was the first time it brought it home to me about the insects. There was nothing on the windscreen of the car. I didn't say anything to the missus, John. But the following morning, I was thinking about it. I was very kind of, I was in a bit of a fugue, a bit of depression about it. No insects on the windscreen. And I mentioned it on the radio programme 2 years ago when I came back from holiday. And I was deluged by people saying, Jesus, Richie, we've been driving as well to the country parks, everywhere. We come back. Normally, John, you remember, John, back in the day, your car would be destroyed, right? With dead bugs. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing, John.
Exactly. And I think this is something that we can see, that we can notice, because this is the problem with microwave radiation when you're approaching people who have no knowledge about it. And because they can't see it, they just think, oh, okay, this is in this person's imagination, or, this person's panicking for no reason. But when you talk about the decline in insects, when you talk about the declining number of small birds, these are things that we can notice when you talk about the antennas going up on the street lights. And it's really important about how we get the message across. And of course, yesterday we had the Devon County Council 5G Spotlight meeting, which will be going to scrutiny. And Devon, it's quite exciting because over here we've got the biggest anti-5G movement in the country.
Yeah.
And we're really aiming for a county moratorium, Richie.
That's what you want, John. You want to get a county moratorium on this. We park that. We'll come back to that. Chris Packham, by the way, just in case you're listening to this programme for the first time, bit curious, and you think John is a raving lunatic conspiracy theorist, he isn't. He isn't. The BBC's Chris Packham wrote an article for one of the broadsheets last year. He was in the New Forest and he nearly died. There were no insects there. Couldn't believe it. This is a fact. This is not bullshit. It's happening. And, you might say, oh, well, how do you know then that it's electromagnetic microwaves, that it's non-ionizing radiation? We know because it is. Because when you rule out everything else, what you're left with, even if it's unlikely, you've got to accept it might be the case. John Kitson is our guest, 5gawareness.com. Go to the website, check it out. We'll come back to how you're getting on in Devon. Great success last year. Hopefully you have more success this year in 2020. We'll come back to that. Now, you mentioned antenna on lampposts. Really glad you said that, because listeners have been tweeting me photographs of LED streetlights, and there are two different photographs doing the rounds. Some of them on top of the LED streetlight, they seem to have a kind of a round kind of fixture which might look like a little light, but it's a circular thing. Others have what looks like to be a very small antenna. Not trying to put you on the spot, but is there a difference? The street light that has the little round thing, how do we know that's got anything to do with 5G?
Right. Well, there's a possibility with the round nodules on top of the LED street
nodule.
light.
Thank you, my friend. Nodule. You've educated me. Nodule. That's the right word. That's the right bloody word. Yes, the nodules. What are they?
Yeah. So there's a possibility that they could just be light sensors. In other words, controlling the street lighting on or off. And then these taller antennas are the 5G weaponized transmitters, which Mark's talking about.
Yeah.
But Mark's also mentioned that you can also get these surveillance items, whether it's a nodule or antenna on top of the street light, which also looks very similar. So I don't have a technological background, but as soon as you start to see those go up, the basic 5G infrastructure is going up, because of course what's happening up and down the country now, in most of the country we've got these LED street lights that are absolutely toxic and affecting people's eye health. They're increasing the rate of breast and prostate cancer. And once they've got those up, they can then, and they have these nodules up, they can easily be changed for these 5G antennas. And I actually referenced that in my presentation because it's important for people to pay attention how this is getting rolled out. It's not getting rolled out immediately, it's step by step. And people need to see what's going on in their area. And of course, the key thing to understand about 5G is its densification. The main definition of 5G being 5th generation. And this is the problem, it's undefined. But I like to think of it as the Internet of Things. So it's everything connecting with everything else. It's a lot more masts. I had a chat with Mark, and he told me that if you get one 4G mast in a town, it's 4G. But if you get 1,000 4G masts, like on these street lights, where they might call it 4G, it's then 5G, because you don't need it every 2 to 10 homes if it's not 5G. That's the difference. And you've got 4G LTE, again, which is 5G. They're not making it easy for us, Richie. But for people who want to know how it's getting rolled out across the country and the coverage, there is 5g.co.uk, and you can actually search your local area. And they already have 55 locations across the UK that already have 5G in operation. Now, of course, this is the official line. But as we know in Gateshead, they never announced that they were putting 5G there, but they were testing it there illegally. And Barry Trow has confirmed that they can actually roll this equipment out without actually announcing it.
They were, and they came after Mark Steele pretty hard when he blew the whistle on it. Mark was on the programme only a short time ago, and when this was going on a couple of years ago, he was on the show. It's good to give him a mention as well. And where you said you're not technical, which is pretty modest of you to say that, because you've done that much research now, I suppose. You know you've got as much technical knowledge as anybody else. But I want to pull you back to something you said a minute ago about LED street lighting. And you said it's toxic. And I've heard that said by people. I've even heard that said by medical people. And you've linked it to breast cancer and prostate cancer. I'm not trying to split hairs with you at all, or I'm not trying to put you on the spot. But I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you. How do we know that LED lighting is linked to prostate and breast cancer?
Sure. So you actually have an Exeter University study that came out quite a while ago, and that was actually referencing the connection. And what it is that the blue light interferes with the hormones. It interferes with the hormonal system and with melatonin, and that in turn can increase the rate of breast and prostate cancer. And this was a study actually led by the Barcelona Institute for Global Health, and it involved the University of Exeter. And they found that participants living in large cities with heavy exposure to blue lights at night had double the risk of prostate cancer and were 1.5 times higher risk of breast cancer. So anybody can look this up. They can Google University of Exeter and they can find this information.
Mark. Good man. Great answer. It is there, that information. And I said something. Listen, I'm not important at all. I'm not trying to big myself up. I did say a couple of years ago, I got a lot of stick for it. I said that the BBC represents a clear and present danger to the health of every man, woman and child in the UK because of what it doesn't do. And we've not heard a whisper about that. And LED streetlights have been rolled out right across the country. It's incumbent on the national broadcaster to tell people that scientists believe that these LED streetlights might be a problem for you and for your family. Not a whisper, Mark. Not a whisper.
Yeah, this is the problem. You know, we're getting nothing from the BBC, and they did some mini documentary showing this phone mast, and there were people up by the phone mast. there are actually special suits that workmen actually have to wear if the phone mast is already in operation. And I found out about this through Mark. But unfortunately, the BBC, I mean, they get funding through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and other groups. It's really difficult reaching the mainstream media. Luckily, the Daily Mail, they have covered 5G quite a number of times and Wi-Fi and smart meters.
And fairly, they've done it objectively, I think, because the BBC have had you on more than once. But they've not so much tried to stitch you up. They've not given you very much time, and they've cut across you the usual tactics, which is dreadful. But you're right to mention the Mail, which a lot of people have problems with the Mail in terms of its coverage of politics and other things. But to its eternal credit, it does take an objective approach to 5G, right?
Yes, it's much better. They covered Gates. They also covered the Totnes moratorium, and then they did another follow-up article, and I was pretty pleased with what they mentioned. And of course, that's gone out to 11 million people, and of course, it's great to be able to get the word out on your show, Richie, because you've covered 5G a lot, and there are media, that are not covering 5G, and Mark and I both say this: if you're not covering 5G, you're covering it up. Because it's one of the most important issues we're facing right now. It has, if we're looking at what's happening with China, it's definitely connected with 5G. And I think this is why we really need moratoriums up and down the country. And if we get a county moratorium, I think that's game over for 5G in the UK. We're going to talk about that in a second. Your campaign to get a county-wide moratorium. John Kitson is our guest. 5G awareness is John's website. It is 5gawareness.com. Couldn't be any simpler. You answered one of the important questions. You said that if people want to see where the things are, go to 5g.co.uk. So thanks for saying that. Some of our listeners should tweet it out. I'll retweet it. 5g.co.uk so you can see what the situation is in your own area. Number of people have asked the old question about why do we need 5G. Mark, the simple answer is, I believe you've told me this on previous programs, we don't need it. It's fast enough. The pre-existing connectivity hubs, I don't want to say hubs, but 4G, 3G, that was quick enough for everything we needed, right? It is for me anyway. Well, exactly. Yeah, of course, we still had health problems with 3G and 4G, but the situation with 5G is there's going to be no escape, and all these different items are coming with Bluetooth nowadays, and this is why I recommend people buy a meter so that they can actually measure their exposure. Otherwise, you just don't know, what your exposure levels are. And just to add to the about where people can find out where 5G is, of course, there are secret deployments going on, and I would recommend, obviously, people also use Google Map, because Mark's also used that. And then, of course, you can zoom in and find some of these antennas on the street lights, possibly in areas where they're not officially announcing it. So I would say, people need to have those critical thinking skills and do some investigation if they're moving to a new location and they want to find out if these antennas are located there.
Really good information. Not to be depressing, I don't like to be depressing, but I've got to talk about these things with you. Didn't the media in this country report last week that more than half of children under 10 are now walking around with a smartphone? Jesus Christ, Mark. I don't want to offend people by blaspheming. I get a bit of criticism. I don't mean to say Jesus Christ so flippantly. But imagine, knowing what we know, imagine what it's going to be like in 15, 20 years, the rate of cancer cases in this country. If half children under 10 with their very thin, underdeveloped craniums are using these things, Mark, well, the outlook in the future is dreadful.
Yeah, it's going to be devastating because, again, children have a smaller body size than adults. We're seeing record depression, record rates of ADHD, child suicide. And the problem is children are bombarded everywhere. If they've got Wi-Fi at home, they've then got Wi-Fi in the schools. Schools are encouraging children to use tablets in the schools, so they're getting exposed from their iPads. Maybe there are smart meters in the schools. I mean, the school we've got here in Dartington, the primary school, where they had the mast erected, they also had smart meters and Wi-Fi in there. So kids are just getting bombarded on multiple levels, and they just don't have a chance. And I've got a friend who's up in Hereford, and he won't let his children use tablets. They're actually at this Steiner school where they don't use so much of this technology. They learn a lot of practical skills. And his children are so advanced for their age. They're so intelligent. And they're top of their class. And they're about, I think, 10 and 12, and they've never used tablets or smartphones in their life.
Brilliant. And just before we talk now about the moratorium, it is important to, if you've got young children and you're new to this, it's important that you pay attention here. The smartphone and the tablet has become a kind of a pacifier of sorts for children and a soother, and it's not good, folks. It's devastating for the kid. Listen to the likes of Chris Busby, who's been researching this stuff forever and a day. Go to 5gawareness.com. You don't need your children carrying these devices, even holding them in their hands. They don't need them. And stand up to it and talk to your schools. When your school says in the future, which they will do, we want the children to have iPads and we're going to bring iPads into the classroom, speak up and ask them, have they done any safety testing around these devices and how they impact on children's health. Speak up, do that. John Kitson is our guest. Terrific success last year in Totnes, getting the local authority there to say, OK, we'll have a moratorium, we'll step back and we'll have a look at the implications of 5G. It was a great thing at the time, Mark. You want to roll this out over the entire county. How's that going, and how do you plan to go about that?
Right. Well, yesterday we had the Devon County 5G Spotlight Review at the County Hall, and a survey was sent out. Now, this is after a group of friends in Exeter. Of course, I've been engaging with Totnes and Kingsbridge. I got the moratorium there with help from others. Have been approaching Exeter, City Council, County Council. We've got so many people who are going to these meetings regularly. And then Devon County Council sent out a survey to get people's opinions on whether they thought 5G was a problem. Many people responded. We had hundreds of people. And then so they convened this Devon 5G Spotlight Review. And then the next stage would be scrutiny, when they'll bring in experts. Now, we had over 150 people turn up for this 5G Spotlight Review. There were just 10 people who were on the pro 5G side who turned up later. And of course, lots of documentation was handed in by the anti-5G group with lots of peer-reviewed research. So the councillors were thoroughly educated. And of course, depending on the result from the scrutiny meeting, where we'll have experts in, hopefully people like Barry Trower, they've been recommended.
Great.
Steele, doctors such as Erica Mallory Blythe as well. We've got a number of doctors, Sarah Starkey, and hopefully that will then, the result of that will have a moratorium. And I've been in touch with Susan Clark in the States, who's been having a lot of success with blocking phone masts, and she gave some really solid advice to me that I'd like to just announce on your show, Richie, if that's okay.
Yes, go ahead, mate. Yeah, absolutely. It's why you're here, John.
This is really solid, and it will help people to get through to their council. So the advice she gave is that it's really important to write down what you're saying at these council meetings and hand it over to the councillors, including the scientific research that you're referring to. There are over 25,000 studies showing microwave radiation causes harm. And do not use language like concerned or worried, because then the council can label you as emotional or mentally unstable. And instead of using those words or asking questions, make statements using facts. And avoid the precautionary principle, because the precautionary principle states that the science is unsettled when it is settled, because we have all these thousands of studies showing harm. So it's important to stress that you want a moratorium or a ban on 5G, because the science is settled on the dangerous effects of microwave radiation. And it's important to focus on microwave radiation instead of EMF, because EMF, electromagnetic fields, encompasses solar radiation. And of course, we benefit from sunlight. So we want to be careful that we're focusing. And that's the advice she gave. And I think that's really important that people take note of that. And we just really think about the strategy we're taking out when we're engaging. And some counsellors will be completely ignorant. So we've got people who are meeting them one-on-one for a coffee or a tea, just breaking it down gently. If you say to counsellors, look, we've got this Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, depopulation, they're going to start to close down. Although, yes, there are these plans in place. We've just got to take it from A to B, B to C, step by step, so that they can eventually get the big picture. And that's what's helped us in Devon to make all this progress.
You don't know just how important that last statement is. All of it is, but to say to people, listen, don't jump in with 2 feet when you're approaching somebody who's never heard of anything like this before. It's a great comment you made there. Don't start introducing, depopulation agendas, because you lose people. Deal in what you can prove. And as you said there, the science is settled. This is harmful. It's very harmful. It's known that it's harmful, and it's been known for a long time. And if you can gently introduce that to your local councillor. I think when we spoke, when you had the success in Totnes, we spoke about, you just mentioned there being very gentle with people, but at the same time, there is an underlying implication, isn't there, for elected officials. Without being threatening and overbearing, you are kind of saying to people, and I like this, listen, don't be in trouble in 5 or 10 years' time. Don't be the mayor or the mayoress or the council leader who did nothing. Think about it. There is a bit of that too, Mark, isn't there?
Oh, of course there is. These people, you've got to see how to approach these individuals. And of course, the councils are not insured for damage caused by microwave radiation. And it's essential to stress that point at every single council meeting, because they're going to be held liable if they don't act. And in their constitutions, it is written in the council constitutions that they have a duty of care to the public, that they have to look after our health and well-being. And if they're abusing that duty of care and not following it, then they are liable. And of course, we know that the banks won't insure from health damage caused by microwave radiation. Some councillors will have children. Some councillors will have grandchildren. And you need to ask them, do you have kids? Are you concerned about this world that your children will grow up in? If 5G is rolled out, maybe some councillors might care more about the environment. So it's really important to see what they care about, where their concerns are. I approached a Torbay councillor who was at the scrutiny meeting, who initially dismissed 5G as a Russian-fueled conspiracy, that Russia was somehow involved, because of course RT have been brilliantly covering
they have indeed
5G, and Russia of course is taking more measures to protect the public than we are, of course. But and then we've had that moratorium in Switzerland, but I currently don't know the status of that, because there's an article that's come out that's said that okay, there's not a full moratorium, but we've got to keep fighting. And we're seeing more and more of these bans, more and more of these legal actions. But yeah, I think we've got to keep it up with the local councils, because that's a key battleground. And if we get a whole county to say no, that's going to have quite an impact for the rest of the country, because they just won't be able to roll this out, Richie, if enough local areas, and the battleground is local. It really is. We've just got to engage with our local. If people don't know people locally, start up a market stall, start talking to people, start writing down names and addresses, create a network. And I'm willing to speak in any town. You get enough people together to give a talk. So, we've just really got to keep the momentum going.
Yeah, it's really good, this. I'm really impressed with this, what you're doing there. And if you did manage to secure the county moratorium, well, the media that has ignored it won't be able to ignore it. They'll have to cover it. I mean, the Mail will cover it and RT will cover it, but they'll have to cover it, the BBC, give it more coverage. 5gawareness.com, we've got John Kitson on the line. John, interesting to me, a couple of people have tweeted about Big Pharma. Susan and others have tweeted there about sleep deprivation. And I absolutely believe that alongside everything else, that people will experience when they're exposed to this wretched technology. Sleep deprivation is definitely something to be looked at, and then you look at people getting sleeping medication. You look at people getting antipsychotic medication. The biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, 5G is manna from heaven to them, isn't it? It must be.
Oh, of course it is. Yeah, because this is the problem. If people don't see the microwave radiation, they just assume, oh, it's some other health problem.
Yeah.
They're going in to their doctor or they're purchasing this medicine. And of course, the LED streetlights are causing massive problems for people who are sleeping. You know, I've got friends who are driving around at nighttime who haven't bought these glasses yet, and they say they just can't get to sleep, or they're on their computers till late. Of course, you do have some computers, phones that can take off the blue light function. People need to have protective eyewear. This is absolutely essential. You need proper blue light protective glasses. You can get them cheaply on eBay. I haven't looked into it in depth, so I can't recommend any particular one. But yeah, it's really important when your immune system is under such attack. It's important to be eating the right food, cutting out sugar, not having too many grains. I've got a friend who would be able to talk to you a lot about that, actually. And yeah, just getting protective eyewear and just reducing your exposure wherever possible, using wired devices, if you can't stretch your Ethernet cable all around your house, you can get D-Link, where you can plug it into the mains and the internet runs through the mains, and then you can just have the Ethernet cable coming from the plug socket. People can take these measures. It's not hard. And you're massively reducing your microwave radiation exposure.
Now, you've just educated. You see, this is the beauty of programs like this, when you've got a bit of time to talk. If you're on the BBC now, you'd have never gotten a chance to say that. You've just educated me. I never heard of D-Link. Now, this is massive. For me, it's massive anyway. So D-Link then is, you don't have to go drilling holes in your ceiling to run your Ethernet cable from, which is probably near your television, your hub. You don't have to go drilling holes in walls. You can get something called D-Link, which means you don't have to go through all that madness, and you can plug it into your mains. You see, I didn't know that, John. That's very important information.
Yeah. I'll look up the website and information, and I'll send it to you, Richie. But yeah, I think people need to embrace these safer solutions.
Yeah, get rid of the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, companies then will be motivated, because what we're seeing now, unfortunately, with the new phones, I mean, you look at the iPhone 11, I believe that even if you switch it off, it's still emitting radiation. And that's a really serious problem.
How does that work if you switch it off? Is it because it's still hot and it's still pulsing something out, even when it's switched off? How does that work?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I just saw a video, and then also I saw an article as well. I can't remember off by heart where I saw it, but the chap was testing it with a microwave radiation meter, an Acousticom 2, which I've got, and it was giving off microwaves. And with the routers now, it's getting more and more harder to find routers where you can actually turn the Wi-Fi off, and you've got to call up the phone company. I mean, BT is the worst. You get these routers, BT Smart Hub, it's got smart in the name, and you have to request for the Wi-Fi to be turned off, but it also emits a separate wireless hotspot where other people can then log on to your Wi-Fi. I mean, it's crazy, but we've got to get these safer solutions out there, and just encourage people to make more sensible choices.
Hey, listen, good luck with everything there in Devon. You know that it's hugely important to us to be talking about this. Thanks for doing the work, because there's nothing in it for you. I know you'll say there is for your friends, for your family, for their children, for your own children. I know there is, mate, but it's a thankless task, I think, what you're doing there. You and Mark Steele and others as well. You mentioned the doctors that you've got working with you. I think it's massively important, and I think people should help you out where they can. And if you can't help out, folks, go to 5gawareness.com, read more about it there, and help out these campaigns if you can. 5gawareness.com. So do keep us posted on that, Mark, there in Devon. And all I can say to you, mate, is thanks for giving us your time. And when you're up in Manchester or Salford, it might be Manchester, Greater Manchester, let us know, because I'll come along to sit in the audience and to pay attention like everybody else, and to buy you a beer at the end. I really appreciate having you on the programme.
Thank you so much, Richie. No, it'd be great to connect. And yeah, if people do want to support me, they can support me via the website, through PayPal, or just get in touch if they want to do it another way. And we have got a couple of events coming up. There's Emma Johnson. She's very interesting. She'd be interesting for you to connect with. She's over in Bournemouth, and she ran as an independent MP. She's got an event on February the 22nd in Dorset there, Southbourne. That's on the website, on my website, 5gawareness.com. And then
Saturday, right? That's Saturday. Emma, that's this coming Saturday, the 22nd.
That's right. And then on the February the 24th, on the Monday, Mark Steele's going to be speaking in Durham.
And all of those events, links to them can be found at 5gawareness.com. Good luck with everything that you've got going on. I really appreciate it, Mark. Thanks for coming back today.
Thanks, Richie, for having me on. It's a pleasure.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you for the work you do. John Kitson there, 5gawareness.com. And that'll be very interesting to see how he gets on now on a county, on a county level. Because they got Totnes to issue a moratorium to suspend 5G based on the work he and others did there. He's a good guy, he'll say. Of course, he's right that it wasn't just him, there were others involved there as well. But I think his whole approach to dealing with people is something that every single one of us can learn. When you're dealing with officialdom, they're not all a shower of bastards, you know. I know that the temptation is to think that they are, you know. Well, if they're working for the council. Yes, yeah. And that's what it's easy to think like that, but they're not all like that. Think of compartmentalization. If you can keep that phrase, it's not a phrase. If you can keep that word in your mind, compartmentalization. For somebody with a degree in English, is it a noun? Compartmentalization. Not everybody working in officialdom is a bastard. And like John said, they don't know this stuff. You know, they don't know it because the chances are your next door neighbour doesn't know it about 5G. About non-ionizing radiation. It's a very good chance the guy living next door to you or the woman living next door to you just won't know. What was that now? When you say, you know, this pulsing, non-ionizing radiation, this microwave, it does bad stuff. And they're like, what now? Since when? They might say to you. So don't assume that people are in on it or that they're covering it up. And I think his approach is brilliant. To say to people, look, here is the peer-reviewed scientific facts from academic men and women in some massively famous universities around the world. Here it is. They say conclusively that it is dangerous, that it is toxic, that it creates a toxic soup with serious implications for people and humanity. So take that information and look at it. These are the facts. And gently remind these people, you don't want to be sued in a few years' time because we can demonstrate that you were given the information, but you didn't do anything about it. So I really appreciate that approach, you know. It's my approach. It wasn't always my approach. Mea culpa. I'm as guilty as the next person as going over the top when talking to people about conspiracy research, going over the top. And, you know, starting off with geoengineering and ending very quickly in the same sentence with depopulation. People's eyes glaze over, you know. They glaze over. David has been on to tweet, Richie, even a digital bed clock emits enough EMF to disturb sleep. Even a bedside lamp, says David. Turn it off at the socket. Thanks, David. That's been said to me before by a guest on the programme a long time ago. That's interesting that. Chris tweets, yes, there is no need for wireless. Richie, he says, in the house. You can feed the internet around the house via the mains, giving multiple Ethernet plugs in other rooms. Netgear is the top brand. Says Chris, we're giving a plug there to Netgear. And Chris is the CEO of Net. No, he's not. Hi to John. John says, Richie, I bought a pair of driving glasses. The driving glasses. Because the LED streetlights and car headlamps were playing havoc with my eyes at night. They turn all the lights orange. The difference has been incredible. I'd recommend buying a pair. They cost next to nothing. You see, John, that's a very good point. We didn't even mention the fact that many cars these days have LED headlights. In fact, does my old banger, my old Renault Megane Estate 2013 model, does it? I know sod all about cars. Mine might have LED lights, I'm not sure, I'll have to check that out. Faisal tweets, I wonder why you can't remove the batteries from iPhones or any smartphones as far as I know. That is a brilliant point. When did that become the norm? I told you last week, didn't I? Or this week, I was away last week, that I was delivered a brand new smartphone of the Samsung variety. It's not brand new, it's about 4 months old, the model. I don't want the new model. I don't want it. So I said, no, give me the notepad that came out back in September last year. That'll do me. They give me a new phone every 2 years. And I did notice, Faisal, that yet again, the phone is unopenable. You can't open it. You can't extract the battery. And this has been the way of it. This has been the norm now for a few years. That's a great point. Why? We used to have access to the battery, little white thing, little silver thing. And if it got shit, as batteries do, because the more you recharge them, they work less well. You don't get so much of a charge. You don't get so much use out of them. So over the years, I have discarded safely, although I don't think you can discard them safely, the batteries, and then bought another one, but you can't do it anymore. Good point. Good bloody point, Faisal. Mr. Sin says to me, Richie, your car doesn't have LED lights. He's gone and looked up the Renault Megane 2013 estate. Good man. WeBuyAnyCar.com. What a pile of shit that is. That told me the other day the car's worth £3,000. Oh, Jesus. It's worth a lot more to me than £3,000. I will have that car for years. I will have it until it explodes. I love that car, actually, that Renault Megane. I love it, driving it around. It gets about 75 miles to the gallon, diesel. It really does, on the open road. I'm never putting diesel in it. I put a half a tank of diesel in, lasts for about 5.5, 6 weeks. Honest to Jesus. There's loads of room in it for the dogs and for the missus and for the shopping. Loads of room in it. Love that old thing. I only got it because my old Ford Focus was smashed into by a woman in a burqa. By a woman in a niqab. Those bloody Pakistanis. In case you don't know the story, 1.5 years ago, I'm driving on Wilmslow Road and a woman came off a Derby Road. Mad bitch. You misogynistic bastard, Richie. She was mad as a box of frogs. She drove from a very small side road onto a massively busy road straight into the BBG. Smashed the bejesus out of me and wrote off my Ford Focus. Yeah. Smashed the shit out of it. And she had the full thing on, I think it's the niqab, the full thing. So her lateral vision, her side-to-side vision wasn't very good. Just drove out onto the road. Fuck that. Come to a junction, brake, me, no fucking chance. Floor it. Straight into the BBG. Did I put a neck brace on me? Did I go for the big money in compensation? Did I? Heck. Of course I didn't. Wouldn't do that to any man or woman. No, there was nothing wrong with me. I had a little bit of a stiff neck and a stiff back. And that was that. But no, I didn't go for the big compensation claim because I'm not a bastard. Although everybody I met said, you should do, Richie, because she'd have done it to you. Racist bastards. How did they know? Maybe she would have prayed to Muhammad, and Muhammad would have said, don't do it. It's fraud. But yeah, that's how I ended up with a Renault Megane estate. Cheeky bastard Mark says, not Mark, Mr. Sin says it'll probably explode soon because it's a Renault. Future Mrs. Allen wouldn't like that. French make great cars. Mark says it sounds like a keeper. 75 miles to the gallon. About 70. It's about 70 really. I think it says 60 officially. It's about 70. Anyway, look, enough of me waffling on about cars, filling the time with automotive talk. I want to mention that Larry Gators presents a nationally syndicated radio show for iHeartRadio in New York, does Larry. And I like him. I like the cut of his jib. I like Larry. I've been watching some of his programs. What happened was I was contacted by somebody who used to play professional football. I'm not saying that now to big myself up, but somebody who's very interested in how celebrities, sportsmen and women and entertainment celebrities are giving it all the occult symbolism, right? And he's turned. I've heard this over the years from Jim Mars, from David Icke, from Jordan, of course, but we've not talked about this for a long time. So Larry's been looking at the death of Kobe Bryant. And looking at Kobe and, you know, some of his pals. It was very interesting, actually, watching the LA Lakers basketball team paying tribute to Kobe in just before their first game following his death in a helicopter accident. So in their first game, now Kobe wasn't active. Kobe retired a few years ago. One of the most successful basketball players of all time. A couple of seasons ago. Amazing player. He certainly was. I saw him play a few times on TV. Unbelievable. So he died in a helicopter crash. Then the Lakers obviously had a game, so there was a tribute to Kobe. And LeBron James was given all the old symbols. And I'm very interested in this. And Larry Gators is as well. Nationally syndicated program, Global Spiritual Revolution Radio for iHeartRadio Network in New York City, and will join me tomorrow to go in depth on this subject. And I think you're going to enjoy listening to Larry Gators tomorrow, Thursday. Yeah, all right. And I'll have much more besides for you tomorrow as well. And I will be back with you tomorrow morning at 9:30 UK time for the crap that is the YouTube live stream, where we look through the newspapers, you and I, the front pages and the stories inside as well. That's 9:30 Monday to Thursday. We'll keep that going for the foreseeable future. There's going to be a temporary thing, but we'll keep it going for the foreseeable future. I want to mention Steve Thornett, who's been tweeting me. Steve, thanks for your tweets. I will look at some of those links that you sent me. The reason I haven't retweeted them, my friend, is I don't know what they're saying. But I will have a look at them. And I'm sure they're above board and right and proper. But thanks for sending me those links. I will look at them. Don't think I'm ignoring you. But I don't want to retweet them because I haven't read them yet. Hi to William Henderson as well. And hi to Anna O'Flanagan. Anna O'Flanagan, Diagwit, Akara. I hope you're well. Anna says, Richie, keep your eye on RTE, which is the Irish national broadcaster. Keep an eye on RTE, Richie, says Anna O'Flanagan. They're trying to take us down the anti-Semitism route because Sinn Féin won the election. They are trying a Corbyn, says Anna. Is that right, Anna? Is Sinn Féin coming under attack for alleged anti-Semitism? Is that right? I'll have a look at that. Of course, I will look at that with great interest. Of course I will, after the programme. That's about it from me then. Thanks to my guest today, Michael Rivero. It is a joy to hear Michael Rivero sounding well. He's been very unwell, as he talked about there earlier on. Continued success to him on his recovery, in his recovery. And thanks to John Kitson. Go to 5gawareness.com to either support what John is doing, to find out where John and his colleagues are speaking in a town near you. And Michael Rivero's website is, of course, whatreallyhappened.com. Until tomorrow, going out with Eric Clapton. Bye for me. Bye now. Look after yourselves and one another.